Good evening. Is the takeover of Greenland next after the abduction of President Maduro of Venezuela and his wife? The US, after the success of its operations in Caracas, is reported to be working on a multi-pronged offensive. Israel is looking at a regime change in Iran. President Trump has already warned Ayatollah Ali Khamenei that a regime, if it uses any force on street protests, it will invite a strong US response. But take a look at the world map. From Colombia to Cuba, from Greenland to Iran, there are multiple targets for the United States of America. Which brings us to a big question of the day. Is there no rule-based order? Is it the law of the jungle in the world now? Might is right. And what happens to the United Nations? Is it now way past its use-by date? What should one make of President Trump's statement, even on India? And that's our top focus on this special broadcast.
Venezuela and Maduro in US grip. From Caracas to South Asia. Chinese weapons crumble again. Trump on a warning spree. Greenland, Colombia, Iran. Dost warns India on Russian soil. Donald, biggest bully Trump.
So 150 US warplanes, attack helicopters, Chinook transport helicopters, electronic warfare aircraft and choppers, they swarmed the Caracas skies as missiles targeted multiple air bases, radars, military installations. And as deposed Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife were paraded on the New York streets, and we'll show you those images. They've been indicted on 4 counts. More details have emerged on the operation and the failure of the Chinese diplomacy, radars, and equipment. But the bigger question, can a head of state be abducted? Has the world response been rather muted? Are Greenland, Cuba, Colombia, and Iran next on Trump target?
Sudden strikes and a dramatic turn in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro under US custody. As Maduro's grip on power collapses, the United States is moving fast. President Donald Trump boldly claims Washington is now in charge of Venezuela and will run the oil-rich nation until a political transition is complete.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transitions.
But the bigger question is, how did Venezuela's heavily armed military fail to respond? For years, Caracas flaunted Chinese-made systems, from the stealth killer JY-27 radars to amphibious assault vehicles and fighter jets, claiming the most advanced defense network in South America. Yet, when the US operation struck, that defense collapsed within hours. Electronic warfare blinded radars, command networks froze, and anti-radiation missiles followed. Without air cover, heavy ground equipment was destroyed or abandoned. Even the latest JY-27A radars, once set to lock onto US stealth jets, proved useless. A combination of real-time intelligence, electronic warfare, and precision strikes knocked out both Chinese and Russian air defense systems. Reportedly, the only damage to US forces came from scattered small arms fire.
Nicolas Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around and he found out. President Trump is deadly serious about stopping the flow of gangs and violence to our country, deadly serious about stopping the flow of drugs and poison to our people, deadly serious about getting back the oil that was stolen from us.
And from Venezuela to South Asia, the pattern repeats. During India's Operation Sindoor, Chinese origin systems used by Pakistan underperformed. Indian BrahMos missiles destroyed air bases and command centers. Rafale jets armed with Scalp and Meteor missiles dominated the skies, while indigenous systems like Akash Tir neutralized drones and missiles with precision. Chinese JF-17 fighters, air defense systems and drones were bypassed, jammed or destroyed. The message is clear in real combat. Chinese weapons often fail against modern electronic warfare and precision strikes, and it has failed twice recently. But for Donald Trump, Venezuela may only be the beginning. The American president has renewed his warnings on Greenland, Iran, and Colombia.
Colombia is very sick too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States.
There's been protesters killed in Iran. You said we were locked and loaded, ready to go. What is the line there for when the U.S. is going to get involved in those protests?
We'll take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
On the other hand, Donald Trump has called Prime Minister Modi a good man, but has threatened to raise tariffs on India's crude oil imports from Russia.
Modi's a very good man. He's a good guy. He knew I was not happy, and it was important to make me happy. They do trade, and we can raise tariffs on them very quickly, and it would be very bad for them.
Our adversaries remain on notice. America can project our will anywhere, anytime.
In a world of sudden strikes and shifting alliances, one thing is clear. In modern warfare, no nation is beyond reach. Bureau Report, India Today.
So Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has once again asked the United States to stop threatening to take over Greenland after President Trump said he absolutely needs Greenland. Colombia, Cuba, Iran, what next? And that big question, is there no rules-based order in the world? Has global response been rather muted? Let's try and make sense of some of these developments. Joining us on this special broadcast, Ambassador Yash Sinha, former Indian ambassador to Venezuela, former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Vanessa Newman is former ambassador of Venezuela to the United Kingdom. Welcome. Lieutenant General Sayadata Hasnain is former military secretary and an analyst of international relations, as is Daniel Silverberg, managing director at Capstone in the United States of America. Ambassador Newman, Keir Starmer is a very well-respected human rights lawyer, the Prime Minister of the UK. The opposition in the UK has urged him to condemn US actions, but he's refrained. Has Europe's response been rather muted in your view? And what does this mean for rules-based order?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it isn't for the rules-based order because Maduro was not a legitimate president. He had lost a presidential election. Your own country is the biggest democracy in the world, and he lost a presidential election, and yet he clung to the presidential palace. He was supposed to have left on the 10th of January of 2025. So he did not have the legitimacy, and he did not have immunity. He was a wanted drug trafficker, narco-terrorist, for very solid investigations that had dated back to even while Chavez was in power and Maduro was his foreign secretary. That information is clearly laid out. I personally have written a book about it, and the DEA has thousands of files on it. So, to my mind, this particular decapitation strike, the capture of Maduro, reinforced the rules-based order. You cannot cling to the presidential palace against the will of your people and do whatever you want to them. And
But
I have
should
written
this
that
come through the United
it
Nations,
reinforces
or
democracy.
can a powerful democracy or a country like the United States take unilateral action? Because today it is the United States, tomorrow it could be China and Taiwan.
Well, that could be, and we might be facing that, China and Taiwan. And the Taiwanese, by the way, have a right to self-determination, the same way my people, the Venezuelans, have a right to their self-determination. Okay, what the situation is that that Venezuela wanted Maduro out, and the United States obliged. Now, in my personal opinion, I think other countries, but I have written is in since 2004. My doctorate was exactly about the fact that because the international order continues to do business, buy the oil, the gold, the diamonds, whatever the commodity is, and give people access to central banks, ports, airports, no matter what they do to their own people, is the proximate cause of tyranny around the world. So this is on all of us. The fact that we have so many tyrannies on the world is because they have learned that all you have to do is get into the presidential palace, win your first election, seize all the assets, seize all the resources, murder your own people, and nobody else will do anything about it. And
Ambassador
now we know
Sinha,
that that's not
your
the case.
reading, okay, Ambassador Sinha, your reading of this, because what would this mean for rules-based order? Or should the United Nations just lock its doors, shut shop? Because now the US will decide what it wants to do in the Western Hemisphere.
Absolutely. I think the description that Ms. Newman made of an autocratic leader can be applied to many leaders, current leaders, and people leading from behind. So should decapitation strikes be ordered against all of them? And one particular so-called leader, I call a failed marshal in our region, is the best friend there in the White House, is feted and given lunch. So I mean, this ridiculous argument that you have the right to go and abduct a president, legitimate or illegitimate is not the question. I'm aware that the elections, he had lost the elections, and Edmundo Gonzalez had actually won the elections. But where is
Yes.
Edmundo Gonzalez? Why is why has the Nicolas Maduro been abducted, and the vice president has been sort of Rodriguez has now been Delcy Rodriguez is now the interim president. What about Machado, the Nobel Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado? What about Edmundo Gonzalez, who won the election? If he's the legitimate president, shouldn't he be sitting in Miraflores Palace right now? So I think this whole thing of taking the law into your own hands, any and everybody can do it. It is setting a very bad example, and in my opinion, it opens a Pandora's box.
It does, because this would mean that the world, Daniel Silverberg, is just going by law of the jungle. Might is right. Trump doesn't like Maduro, so he'll have him abducted. What about the United Nations? Should this not have happened through the UN?
I think it's really important to understand how President Trump and his team are viewing this action before we assess how the UN and others might respond. President Trump viewed this as a backyard operation. He has been very clear in his national security strategy, in his rhetoric, and now I would argue in his actions, that the Western Hemisphere is an extension, in his view, of the United States. It is part of our sphere of influence. And as Marco Rubio said yesterday on Sunday shows, which, by the way, I think provided the clearest lens of the internal deliberations of the administration, Marco Rubio said we are not going to allow any country to serve as a platform for our adversaries, Russia, China, and Iran, to operate in our region. So I frankly don't think that this administration is particularly concerned about the UN in this instance, about a multilateral approach. They viewed it as a Monroe Doctrine-like backyard sphere of influence effort to protect the US. And we can argue whether this was the right move or not, but I think
Okay.
for starters, it's critical to understand how they were viewing it.
Okay. So the president is gone. The regime remains. Depends whether it will be stable and how stable will it be in the times to come. But Ambassador Newman, it's Venezuela today, Cuba tomorrow, or Colombia tomorrow, Greenland next, Iran on target. This would somehow indicate that rules-based order have now been thrown out of the window. UN does not matter. It depends what President Trump thinks.
Thank you. And by the way, my surname is pronounced Neumann, like Freud. Okay,
Neumann.
That's all right. Unfortunately, I'm used to it. I think I absolutely 100% agree with what Mark Silverberg said. It was very clearly stated in the national security strategy that the United States views this as their sphere of influence and views it as a threat to their national security. The drugs, the migration. Don't forget, 9 million people, myself included. Have fled Venezuela.
Left the country.
Have left the country. It's bigger than Ireland, okay? And because they can't, there's no life there. There's only repression, corruption, and it's a horrible life. So they've gone to find better lives elsewhere. Now, I think that the UN has been ineffectual for a very long time. I wrote about this again back in 2004, saying that what I argued was actually based on what was chic at the time, was the responsibility to protect. Does anybody remember that? The R2P doctrine that was going through the United Nations and was supposed to help us, have a cosmopolitan view of our international brotherhood to defend our rights. That is the ethical and moral justification. The responsibility to protect of the United Nations is really what underpins that type of action. On the one hand. On the other hand, you also have the national security strategy of the United States, that the Western Hemisphere is the biggest source of migration, drugs, and trade. And yeah, they're concerned about it. As for the other countries,
so two very important points.
I'll leave that to other commentators.
Ambassador Sinha, two very important points. One, this is US war against drugs. Does this indicate the US next will go after whether it's Colombia or Cuba and does not want China or Russia's influence in the Western Hemisphere? Does this bring the US directly in collision with China and Russia, and the fact that the Chinese have massive investments in Venezuela, the Russians in Cuba?
As far as Chinese investments in Venezuela are concerned, they're probably less than Chinese investments in other countries in the region. But be that as it may, I think the China and Russia have a presence. They've always had a presence in Latin America, in Venezuela in particular. But was that a threat to the United States? I guess only the US can judge that. But to make another point, because we had elections in our neighborhood in Pakistan, and the most popular leader and the person who was supposed to have won that election is in jail.
Yes.
And we have a government which has been installed by the army. And the self-appointed field marshal is being feted in the White House. So, I don't want to carve a sphere of influence for India, but what happens in our neighborhood certainly concerns us. Look what's happening in Bangladesh. There was a movement there which overthrew a legitimately elected government, and now we have jihadis running all over. Is that the sort of exceptionalism we are looking at? Because I think we need to be very careful, and that's why I said when you opened a Pandora's box, the R2P, I was very much in the UN in New York, that I know India opposed it precisely for these reasons, because it'd be used for your own ends and under a rubric of larger, common good. So I think what has happened, I'm not in any way trying to defend President Maduro and his regime. On the contrary, I'm aware of sort of the shenanigans that went on there. What I have a problem is the way he was abducted and brought there. I mean, he's a fugitive from justice, according to what I've read from the US government, the administration. But the fact is there are many fugitives from justice. Do you go after all of them and pick them out from wherever they are in their holes? After all, Saddam Hussein was picked up from Iraq, and see what had happened to Iraq in Afghanistan. see what's happening in Afghanistan. So I think
Look at
to
what
the
happened in
populist,
Libya, and nobody's defending Colonel Gaddafi.
look
Nobody's
at Syria.
defending.
Look at Syria. We have a person who was on the most wanted list in the sanctions list of the UN is now sitting as president. Of course, he could have
Oh,
reformed
absolutely.
himself,
Ambassador
but
Neumann does
let
not
us change
agree.
his spots,
She
I
wants to
don't
come in,
know.
but I want to bring in General Hasnain before I lose him again. Ambassador Neumann, give me a moment. Daniel Silverberg, give me a moment. General Hasnain, on the military aspect, as an aside, I want to raise the point. Has the myth of Chinese anti-stealth been shattered? Look at how Chinese air defense networks were blind to the US offensive. Sir, is this another setback to the Chinese-made weapons and systems after Operation Sindoor?
Thank you, Gaurav, for having me on your show. I'm sorry the audio was not too good in the beginning before I could join. So I've not really followed the entire show, but I've got your question exactly. Yes, there's no doubt that when you make an assessment of Chinese weapons and wherever they have performed, we've seen this now twice, the second time 2025-26, the performance obviously has been of a very low quality. I'm not sure in the case of Venezuela whether the Venezuelan armed forces were prepared to resist. Now, that is a question, that's a bit of a doubt in the mind, because if they were ready to resist, and if in that case they could not discern the early warning of an impending US raid, then obviously the quality of weaponry that they had, the quality of radars, early warning equipment is highly suspect. But having said that, I would also add one more comment on the military aspects. The United States has they've done a fairly professional job, no doubt. I believe they've been preparing for the better part of 6 months on the intel regarding Venezuelan deployment and protection and security for their president. But the history of the United States Special Forces, apart from the absolutely outstanding action against Osama bin Laden, has not been very good either. And to think that they can take out something like this through a surgical strike going into Mexico or going into Colombia or going into Cuba, etc., you'll have to think many times over. I may remind everyone what happened to the Delta Force way back in 1979, 1980,
in Iran,
when an attempt was made to try and rescue the 54 hostages who were taken there hostage in Tehran during the Iranian Revolution. So I think it would be a very risky thing to take this as an example and start executing operations all over the Western Hemisphere just to take out various offenders under the garb of national interest.
Okay, Daniel Silverman, how do you view America saying will not permit Russian and Chinese or foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere? What is the US appreciation? How is China likely to respond to this beyond their opposition to these actions? Or will China just take this template and try it in Taiwan 2027?
I frankly don't think that China's leadership is impacted one way or another in terms of their calculation on Taiwan regarding what happens in Venezuela. When President Xi thinks that it's the right moment to attack Taiwan, then he'll do it regardless of what's happening in the Western Hemisphere, Ukraine, or any other part of the world. And it's the job of the United States and key allies like India and Japan to dissuade him from doing that. I don't think that this operation is going to have a significant impact on U.S. relations with any of our allies or adversaries at this point. I am concerned as a former longtime lead congressional counsel who was responsible for war powers and congressional oversight of military action. I frankly am concerned that there was such distrust between the administration and Congress that not even the Gang of Eight, not even a small group of members was briefed on this. But in terms of what this means for U.S. foreign policy, it is still so early, we simply don't know. What we do know is there's going to be a major effort to stabilize Venezuela's oil economy. to make sure that it's diversified and not merely in the hands of the ruling elite. But even for that to happen, so many steps, Gaurav, need to take place first.
Okay.
The U.S.
Okay,
needs to
Ambassador
unwind
Sinha.
sanctions regime.
Ambassador Sinha, before I bring in Ambassador Neumann, Ambassador Sinha, you've served in Venezuela. So the way Daniel was saying, do you actually see US firms now move and take advantage of the oil? Would that bring prices down? Would it also, if I may ask, reduce Indian dependence on Russian oil?
You know, Gaurav, before President Chavez came to power in 1999, you had American companies basically investing and exploiting the oil resources in the Orinoco Belt and in that entire
Yes.
area in Venezuela.
Chevron,
And
yes.
they built up the oil industry in Maracaibo. They built up the oil industry in Venezuela. So there is absolutely right that the American investment, American companies did help, but it created a kleptocracy in Venezuela. You had the oligarchs pocketing most of that wealth, and the people that is why the people didn't really benefit, and that is why President Chavez won the election and came to power. And he came to power as a charismatic leader. I can't say the same for President Maduro, but the fact is that there was a reaction. And since the Chavistas have mismanaged since then, and the situation is so dire that Venezuela, with the largest oil reserves in the
Yes.
world, is producing a pittance and exporting even less. So I think if the oil industry is stabilized by American and other companies, why only American, by other companies also, it would be a good thing. But that's going to take a long time because the condition of those
Will have to be. Ambassador
facilities,
Neumann, you wanted to
Carabobo,
come in
etc., not
on
good.
Venezuelan oil. Do you see American companies now exploit that?
Well, let me correct the former ambassador, the gentleman, His Excellency, on a point of fact, right? Not opinion, fact. Venezuelan oil has never been in the hands of the oligarchs. This is some like Russian disinformation campaign that I've been living through for decades. It went simply from foreign ownership. Brits were the first ones, then the Americans, and then which is why you had so much of the upper class was related to the Rockefeller family, related by either marriage or business-wise. So you had the Brits, and then the Americans, and then it was nationalized and taken by the Venezuelan government. Not for 1 second ever in the history of Venezuela have Venezuelan citizens, so-called oligarchs, ever owned a Venezuelan oil.
No, but
So
it's only the
don't give me
rich
this
few, is
oligarchs
what Ambassador
pocketed
says.
it, because it's
Okay,
simply
Ambassador,
false.
since
I
the
didn't
point has
say
been
that the
raised,
oligarchs ran the
kindly
oil
before I bring
companies
in
in
General
this
not the
Hasina.
Middle
region.
East. Venezuela is also not the
Ambassador
Middle East.
Sinha.
Yeah, I
Ambassador
think
Sinha.
what I said was misunderstood. I didn't say that the oligarchs owned the oil. They benefited from the oil revenues. People in Venezuela, the upper classes, the rich people, they benefited. I'm not saying that they ran the oil companies or they owned the oil companies. Certainly not. I mean, we know who owns ExxonMobil and Chevron and
Yes.
ConocoPhillips and Texaco, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that argument is fallacious. But anyway, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens, and because the situation is still unfolding.
And the last 30 seconds that I have on this part of the show, Daniel Silverman, your reading of Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, saying, do not threaten to take over Greenland. This is a very bizarre situation that one NATO country is asking another NATO country, do not take over. But do you think President Trump will?
I think President Trump and his team feel remarkably emboldened right now. I think that they believe our adversaries are quaking in fear of the United States. Personally, I don't think that's the case, but I sense that that is their perception, and that our allies, like Denmark, are going to be more willing to bend to our will. I think that that could be a strategic miscalculation, and I think the Denmark's prime minister's remarks were spot on point of saying, let's take a calm, rational approach here, and figure out a solution. If the
Oh,
United
absolutely,
States,
because
instead
what
of
would
with a
that mean?
stick,
So absolutely, what would that mean for NATO if one NATO country is threatening to take over territory of another NATO country, Ambassador Sinha? And also your reading of President Trump's statement on India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, words to the effect that they wanted to make me happy. The Prime Minister of India, words to that effect, he's a good man, he's a good guy, he knows I'm not very happy and it's important to make me happy.
You know, the problem,
Ambassador
I'm not
Sinha.
going to comment on what President Trump said in terms of making him happy. But what I can say is the Prime Minister of India is a good man, then I think you're showing your love in completely the wrong way. Because by sanctioning India 50% tariffs and then threatening to increase the tariffs, I don't think you're going to be very popular here.
Oh, absolutely. I want to thank all my guests for being a part of this show. There's so much to talk about, but there are massive protests in 21 of 31 regions in Iran, and India has now issued an advisory because of these protests due to inflation and collapsing economy and the protests on the streets and the action that's been taken. India has issued an advisory to all Indian citizens. The advisory says, in view of latest developments, Indian nationals are advised to avoid non-essential travel to the Islamic Republic of Iran until further notice. Indian citizens currently in Iran should exercise due caution, avoid areas of protests or demonstrations, and closely monitor news as well as websites and social media handles of the Embassy of India in Tehran. Indian nationals living in Iran on resident visa are also advised to register with the Indian Embassy if they haven't done so already. Look at those images. These are protests that are continuing for over a week and intensifying on the streets, not just of Tehran, but across Iran. 21 of 31 regions after the collapse of the economy. And if I may, look at the currency. So $1 is worth 14 lakh Iranian riyals. So this is how much the economy or the currency has collapsed. The economy is in a shambles. It started with the protest of traders and now it's intensified, and this unrest is almost across Iran. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he has actually said that demonstrators will be put in their place. The latest protests in Iran began when shopkeepers took to the streets of Tehran on the 28th of December to express their anger and anguish at another sharp fall in the value of the Iranian currency against the US dollar. Inflation has risen to over 40% as sanctions over Iran's nuclear program continue to squeeze the economy. We'll get you more on this big story, but big story on India first. 1,000 years after Mahmud of Ghazni's first attack and 7.5 decades since its post-independence revival, the Somnath temple is once again at the heart of India's conversation and politics. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has hailed the Somnath temple as a timeless symbol of the Bharatiya spirit, of India's spirit. He's praised it for its endurance and, of course, Sardar Patel's role in its restoration. He did take a jibe also at independent India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's response in 1951. The Congress, however, accuses the BJP of politicizing history, claiming Nehru is being used to score contemporary political points. The temple, we know, is more than just a pilgrimage. It now reflects, and how it reflects, Bhagwan Somnath, India's cultural renaissance. And it continues to shape our present and stir political passions. We get you more in this report.
History, politics, and the battle of narrative. A 1,000 years after its destruction and 75 years after its reconstruction, the Somnath Shrine is back at the center of India's political and ideological debate. As the country marks 1,000 years since Mahmud of Ghazni's first attack, history is back in focus, reopening old debates over faith, secularism, and nationhood. Located at Prabhas Patan near Veraval in Gujarat, Somnath is believed to be the first among the 12 Jyotirlings of Lord Shiva. Over centuries, the temple was destroyed and rebuilt repeatedly, most notably after attacks of Mahmud of Ghazni and later Aurangzeb. Its reconstruction in 1951 after independence turned Somnath into a powerful symbol of cultural continuity and resilience. This year, the millennium of Ghazni's attack is being marked as Somnath Swabhiman Parv. In a blog, Prime Minister Narendra Modi described Somnath as an eternal proclamation of India's soul, highlighting its survival despite centuries of destruction and its enduring pull on millions of devotees. He also recalled Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's role in rebuilding the temple and took a swipe at Jawaharlal Nehru, saying the opening of the temple in 1951 did not enthuse the first Prime Minister of the country. After the Prime Minister's remarks, the BJP sharpened its attack on the Congress.
पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू की डिस्कवरी ऑफ इंडिया, वो कहते हैं महमूद वाज फार मोर ए वॉरियर देन ए मैन ऑफ फेथ. Like many other conquerors, he used to exploit the name of religion for its conquest. India was to him just a place from which he could earn the treasures and material. यानी वो कोई धार्मिक उन्मादी नहीं था, वो तो पैसा कमाने के लिए आया था और उसके लिए भारत में आकर सिर्फ पैसा प्राप्त करना ही उसका उद्देश्य था.
The Congress says the BJP repeatedly invokes Nehru from political gain and has claimed that the Saffron Party is diverting attention and such remarks.
जितनी नेहरू जी की गलतियां हों, जितना गाली देना हो, इकट्ठा कर ले. एक ही दिन में, 2 दिन में, 4 दिन में वो सारा गुस्सा, सारा जितना वो है भड़ास से निकाल दे. उसके बाद में देश का विकास करे. यही मैं मोदी जी से कहूंगा.
दिल्ली में आप भी इसी जहरीली हवा में सांस ले रहे हैं. अंकिता भंडारी को न्याय को लेकर लोग सड़कों के ऊपर उतरे हैं. ट्रंप भारत के प्रधानमंत्री को अपशब्द की तरह से बातचीत कर रहे हैं. इंदौर में बच्चे पानी पीने से मर रहे हैं. इस सब पे प्रधानमंत्री को लिखना चाहिए. इस सब पे प्रधानमंत्री की क्या ड्यूटी बनती है, क्या उनका नैतिक फर्ज है, इस पे उनको बोलना चाहिए.
At its core, the Somnath debate reflects two different ideas of secularism. The BJP sees it as civilizational pride and cultural revival, while the Congress stresses strict state neutrality to avoid communal divisions. Today, as political narratives collide, the temple stands as a reminder that India's past continues to shape its present and influence the debate over its future. Bureau Report, India Today.
So Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be visiting the Somnath temple on the 11th of January. There are year-long activities that have been planned at the Somnath to mark the Somnath Swabhiman Parv. And at the center of this debate lies this clash of visions. One that views Somnath as a beacon of Bharat's cultural pride, and the other that cautions against mixing faith and politics while being accused of doing the same, and with minority appeasement. So joining me on India First is Tuhin Sinha of the BJP and Mahima Singh of the Congress. Tuhin Sinha, the Somnath Parv may mark 1,000 years of resilience and revival, sir, but respond to those who say this is being used to politically target Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and the Congress party. It's an attempt to portray the Congress in poor light.
Good evening, Gaurav. Good evening, everybody. You know, facts cannot be denied. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi has very clearly stated, for us, Somnath, which has the oldest Jyotirling, and in fact, some believe that, you know, the Jyotirling dates back to the time when Bhagwan Krishna actually lived. You know, the Congress never took pride in our civilizational identities. And it's a fact that Nehru tried to prevent Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was the then president, from going for the inauguration of it. This is something which even Dr. Rajendra Prasad's own granddaughter has put on record. But that's point number one. The second point is that the present day Congress has declined to the extent where Rahul Gandhi openly says हिंदुओं में एक शक्ति का concept है, हमारी लड़ाई उस शक्ति से. So imagine the plight of this Congress, imagine the plight of this party which is going all out to woo the minority community at the cost of hurting the sentiments of the Hindu community.
Okay,
when
Mahima
the
Singh
alliance
disagrees
partner
with you.
of Congress party.
Mahima Singh completely disagrees with you. So let's take this point by point. Mahima Singh, the point that you disagree with, ma'am, and when the BJP or when the Prime Minister says that the Somnath temple represents 1,000 years of resilience and revival, why does the Congress see this as mixing politics and religion?
Jai Hind, I must say at the very outset that I am a rightful Hindu, yet I am a more proud Indian. And I take great pride in the legacy and heritage of my country and its history. And so did Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the very first Prime Minister of this country, under whose cabinet, the cabinet that he chaired, the decision to rebuild this temple was taken. In fact, the driving force behind rebuilding this temple, the historic Somnath temple, the driving force was Sri K.M. Munshi, who in his book, Gaurav, the book named Pilgrimage to Freedom, 1902 to 1950, has categorically mentioned how Nehru agreed for the rebuilding of the temple using government funds. Then it was Bapu Gandhi who came forward and said, let the public contributions be brought in, let the temple be rebuilt with public contributions. And thus the temple was rebuilt. Yes, when Dr. Rajendra Prasad wrote into the Prime Minister, the conversation is public because those were the times when transparency and dissent was at the very core of the dialogue, unlike this last decade. In this decade, an SIR is brought about and there are no files maintained. An RTI activist goes and asks for the files. Where are the files? They have no record. A notebandi is done. Their own cabinet ministers do not know about it. Those were the times when there was dissent, when there was dissent, when there was transparency. Yes, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru told Dr. Rajendra Prasad, he said, Rajendra Babu, I advise you against this. Why? Because he said we have stopped our expenditure on education, health, and other beneficent services right now. Why? Because he said that he can't afford it at the moment. And at that time, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, as the head of the state, as the president of the country, participating, in a religious event, brought the wrath of the global community later to us. Of course, because we were not able to spend on the very basic fundamental necessities.
Fair enough.
Of our
Tuhin
populace.
Sinha, respond that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Mahima Singh says, wasn't opposed to the temple, was only opposed to either, public funding, the government spending, where Bapu said, let it be public spending. Two, when the Prime Minister noted that Jawaharlal Nehru was not supportive of associating top constitutional authorities with temple reopening, Dr. Rajendra Prasad stood firm, the rest is history. This is what the Prime Minister said. Now, tell me this, why drag in Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru today?
Very clearly, the Congress spokesperson has provided you the wrong reasons for Nehru not allowing or requesting Dr. Rajendra Prasad to not go for the inauguration of the temple. Very clearly, it had to do with Nehru's flawed understanding of secularism, flawed perception of secularism. But Gaurav, I think, these are separate issues. Our cultural identity, taking pride in our cultural identity is a separate thing. Fast-tracking the reformist agenda, which our government has done throughout the last year, is a different thing. Governance is different, but taking pride in our culture, why should the Congress party grudge that? Imagine there were 40,000 temples which were destroyed by Mughals and by invaders. We take pride in resurrecting, only those which are so eternal that they define our existence as a civilization. Why should the Congress party have a problem with that?
Okay, Mahima Singh, you want to respond to this? Because Defense Minister Rajnath Singh was quoted saying words to the effect that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru wanted to build the Babri using public funds, but it was Sardar Patel who opposed that, that no public funds will be used either for Babri or for Somnath, and even Ram Temple was, built using the common people's money and not government money.
Let me indulge me for a fair opportunity. But before I go forward to say that, let me just say that the BJP spokesperson has certainly not gone through the very much available correspondence between Dr. Rajendra Prasad and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, excerpts of which, two excerpts I will just read out. One is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's first response to Dr. Rajendra Prasad. My dear Rajendra Babu, I confess that I do not like the idea of your associating yourself with the spectacular opening of the Somnath temple. This is not merely visiting a temple, which can certainly be done by you or anyone else, but rather participating in a significant function which unfortunately has a number of implications. Whereafter, Dr. Rajendra Prasad wrote again on 10th March 1951 and said that, well, he would like to participate. Whereafter, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru very much wrote to him and said, I am sorry for the delay in answering your letter of the 10th March regarding your visit to Somnath temple. I have already conveyed my reactions to this, but if you feel that it will not be right for you to refuse the invitation, I would not like to press my point any further. Now, compare this with the Pran Pratishtha that we saw the last year. Compare this with the treatment of our Rashtrapati today, Draupadi Murmu ji.
The last 30 seconds I have on this part of the show, let me quickly get Tuhin Sinha to respond to this. When we talk of 1,000 years of resilience, it's also taking everyone together. Analysts say that this effort is an attempt to show the Congress as anti-Hindu, sir, which many analysts argue is incorrect.
Gaurav, it's the Congress party which has shown itself as anti-Hindu. We just remind the people. It's our job as a political party to remind what the Congress party is doing. What did Rahul Gandhi say about the Pran Pratishtha in Ayodhya? He ridiculed it, calling it, Naach Gana. What did he say about the Chhat Puja in Bihar? He ridiculed it, saying drama. So we have seen the behavior of the Congress party, their sheer disrespect for Hindu traditions over the years. And by the way, let me also remind you, this was not the Congress culture in 1988, where Rajiv Gandhi started his election campaign for 1989 elections from Ayodhya, saying he will install Ram Rajya.
Last 30 seconds, madam. Last 30 seconds, I've run out of time. But since a specific point has been raised about the Congress, respond, ma'am.
I was making earlier. You have to allow me to finish the point I was making earlier. You see, the BJP spokesperson is speaking, without any idea of what India. I have just two questions of the BJP spokespersons to ask. I want to ask him, why was Draupadi Murmu ji not invited to the inauguration of Central Vista, which was done twice? Also, I want to ask.
So unrelated to today's show specifically, and I've run out of time. I've run out of time today, but perhaps in the days and weeks ahead, when this becomes a talking point, we will revisit this story. Mahima Singh and Tuhin Sinha for joining me here. Many thanks.